is everywhere and constantly on the rise. Quick and easy cases are solved daily, but what of those more sinister and cold cases that remain to be solved? Join host Ashley and Candi as they dive into the horror of some of these cases and shed some light on what is truly behind the realm of darkness. Now, here are your hosts of Realm of Darkness, Ashley Moreno and Candi Howard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back after such a long 6-month hiatus of Realm of Darkness. I'm so excited to be back, and I'm so excited to start sharing some new crimes that we found with you. But before we jump into tonight's true crime story, I want to introduce you to my brand new co-host, Candi. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Candi has a long career in paranormal investigating. She does study witchcraft, all different types of things. She's a beautiful Indigenous woman, and I'm so excited that you're joining the team. So everybody, please welcome Candi.
Yeah, thank you. It's really, really great to be here. We've got an incredible show tonight, so this is going to be lots of fun.
Yes.
And if you see stuff moving behind me, it's okay. I have haunted dolls back here. There's just a few of them. So if they move, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just,
point them out. Maybe it can become a conversation piece. But no, tonight I'm super excited. One of the cases that we're going to talk about is something that is extremely devastating. It is something that's still kind of in the media right now. It is a newer case. It is what everyone knows as the Idaho murders. For some of you that might not know what that is, in November 13th of last year, 2022, there were 4 college students who were at their off-campus house. And unfortunately, after a night of going out, nothing crazy, just typical college, going out, coming home, they were brutally murdered. They were all stabbed multiple times. And as the police say, it was one of the most gruesome crime scenes that they've ever experienced in Monroe, Idaho. These 4 students, they were roughly 1920s. One of them wasn't even supposed to be there. She was just back visiting her best friend because she was actually moving to Texas. So that's just kind of a quick Cliff Note version to kind of get you guys caught up on where we're going to start going. But Candi, we've had conversations about this case. We talk a lot of true crime together, being, best friends and things like that. One of the things that strikes me about this is, it was a college house. It was off campus. So they did do a lot of parties there. Mm-hmm. It was not uncommon to have people in and out of the house on a regular basis. The cops have been caught a couple of times for noise disturbances. And there were, I think, a total of 6 roommates that lived in this house.
Yeah.
And at the time of the murder, there were technically 4 roommates and a boyfriend. So there was a total of 5 people in this house. And with all of this, out of all 5, there was a survivor. There was one survivor. She was a roommate of the girls. And the way that it worked is the house was a 3-story house. Mm-hmm. On the very top floor, I believe 2 of the girls were sharing a room like best friends do after a night of hanging out, drinking, whatever. There were 2 girls on the top floor. There was a girl and her boyfriend on the first floor. And then what was considered like the basement, I'm assuming, is where that roommate was who survived.
Yeah. So I got an issue.
So here's
with this,
yeah,
with the whole survivor thing.
Yes, and this is where I want to get kind of going with you, because on this show we do talk a little bit about the crime, but then we talk about the things that just don't make sense. And the murderer, as of right now, there's one person in custody. Mm-hmm. His name is Brian. He's in custody for the murders, but he brutally stabbed 4 people.
Yeah.
And one of them being a male, and he wasn't a tiny man. He was, a very nicely built college student, and he stabbed these people repeatedly. When the surviving roommate was kind of giving, we'll say, her testimony to the police, she mentioned that she had heard noises. She had heard what sounded like the dog playing, and she had heard somebody crying. She couldn't decide which one was crying.
Muffled crying.
Yes, she had heard one of the females crying, and then she heard a man saying, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." And at that point, she opens her door and she looks out. And when she looks through the crack of her door, she sees a man with a mask walk, stop, look at her, make eye contact, and she shuts the door and locks it. And in my brain, if I had roommates and I had heard crying and a lot of thuds and bumps and things that just didn't sound right, and then I saw a man in a mask, I would instantly probably call my dad. I'd probably call the police, or at least go up and see if they're okay. And none of that happened in this case.
You're not going to lock the door, go back to bed, and be like, okay, I'm out, deuces.
Clearly something registered in your brain that you need to lock the door. And I don't know, I cannot confirm if this roommate, and I'm not going to mention her name just for security reasons, because, there's a lot of mixed feelings on what she witnessed. A night after drinking, I feel like the normal person would still be in the right mindset to be like, a man in a ski mask is probably not supposed to be in my house. And she left the door and went back to bed. And then the next day she woke up and nobody called the police until noon.
Right.
Nobody called the police till noon.
The crime happened at about 4 a.m.
Yes.
Best determined about 4 a.m. And the kicker with me is, okay, not only did she, she woke up, okay, and even if she was completely hammered, I mean, just blackout, plastered, drunk, she, opens the door, her brain registers something enough to make her think, okay, I need to lock the door. Okay, we'll give her that. All right, maybe she's not the wherewithal enough for everything to really click. She goes back to bed. Okay, fine. But then when she gets up, hours and hours later, this is a brutal, brutal crime scene. Okay, to the point that the police actually say it's one of the worst that they've ever seen. So bad that the blood is actually coming through the bottom portion of the house onto the outside of the house. There's that much blood.
Said that the blood from one of the victims, and again, if you're really that into detail, you can Google that just for respect of the family. I don't want to bring names into it. The blood was so saturated into the floor that it was leaking outside of, not shingles, but siding, in between siding and foundation, and they could see
onto the foundation of the house.
Yes. And the thing that baffles me about this is that a group of friends was called before the police were called. And the police report and the police call that had been played out to the public was that there was just a drunk, unconscious girl. Yeah.
And no mention of anything else.
No.
Even and this is hours after, you've been asleep, like you have kind of slept off. I mean,
a minimum of 6 hours.
21 years old, we all have been there. We all know after a couple hours, you are good to go. Like you process that stuff out. You're good. You do not. Something's hanky there. You're not going to mistake unconscious for brutally murdered, multiple stab wounds and blood everywhere. I've got issue with that. There's something
right. And that's the part of the case that I just can't wrap my head around. And this roommate's not, she was interrogated. She was questioned in the police. She was taken down. But they did their research and they did their investigation, and she was found to not be guilty of anything. There was no evidence that she had a part in it. You can't go off of DNA because she did live in the house. but it just, I don't know, from a moral standpoint, it really bothers me. And maybe, you know, college kids, I'm not 20 anymore. I don't know, but maybe fear took place, shock. I'm sure the girl was into some type of
Absolutely.
shock, but I just don't think that your body is going to go into shock or your mind's going to go into shock to erase the sight of that much blood.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the conversations we had earlier was, you know, just think about the amount of blood that happens from a nosebleed, or imagine, you know, a half gallon of milk, you dump that on the floor, and that's a lot. Now imagine that blood. To say that you didn't see that, and I'm not saying she's guilty. I'm just saying something's not adding up for me.
Yeah, something's not right. I mean, was she threatened? You know, is she, you know, forced to, you know, turn a blind eye to something to protect somebody else? Right.
And you're a nurse. I want your opinion, because I know blood has a very distinct smell.
It does.
Especially if it's been exposed to the air for so many hours.
Yeah.
To not notice the smell.
So blood and death both have a very distinct odor. So blood itself, if you've ever smelled, get a penny wet. Let it sit on your counter for 5 minutes. That's what blood smells like. It has that very distinct copper, zinc kind of smell to it. And then when a dead body sits,
4.
Yeah, let alone 4. When it sits for brief periods of time, less than 30 minutes, it has a very distinct odor. It has this, and y'all are going to think I'm weird. Okay, no hate on me, but it has a very, like, almost sweet kind of smell to it, because bodies release every fluid that's there, including sweat. And so, you know, the heat's on because it is cold. It's winter. This is November.
Yeah.
So you're going to have sweat. You're going to have everything else that comes out of a body, and it's intermingled. So this does not smell well in this house. And you multiply that by 4. So
now on the flip side, because, you know, that's what I like to do. Now on the flip side, being that roommate, I mean, I could see maybe, and there's no proof that she was even drinking that night. These are just all allegations and assumptions on our part. I'm just, you know, I think it was like a Friday or Saturday night, college. That's what you do. Yeah. But now from her side, now imagine you are 100% innocent. You have the trauma of 3 of your roommates and her boyfriend being murdered. You saw the killer. Now you made some probably not smart decisions. Yep. And now you're like, oh, I could possibly be looked at for murder.
Well, yeah.
It's terrifying.
Immediate trauma response. PTSD kicks in. You know, you could also go into what psychiatrists call a fugue state. So it's a, think of it as like amnesia, like a temporary amnesia, and it's a coping mechanism. So your brain completely shuts off. You essentially still perform regular duties, but you're outside of your body. You have no idea what you're doing.
Which is what I think might have happened to her. Because, I mean, in reality, I can sit here and say, I don't know how this happened. I don't know how she didn't see this. But she's still a baby. She's 19, 20 years old. She's young. She's probably never experienced anything to this level of trauma. And it's just, it's not black and white. It's very some gray. People think that she has something to do with it. Some people think she was just, you know, in the wrong place at the wrong time. But, you know, moving forward with the killings, you know, there were not a lot of evidence that the police could go off of, because like I said, you know, it was a party house. They were known for entertaining. And the problem is when you have people in and out of your house all the time, especially if you're like the college party house, there's so many
house, right? So doors were never locked.
Doors were locked. So many different traces of DNA. So you can't truly trust that. I believe there was no murder weapon at the scene. The only thing that they ended up finding was a knife sheath that was under one of the bodies. That had DNA on it. And that is where they were able to get the DNA that I want to say solidified Brian's arrest. So
yes, that was kind of their smoking gun.
Yes,
I guess.
because they had previous evidence. They had his car on different surveillance cameras throughout the streets. They had his cell phone was pinged at a tower very close to the house. So they had little
pieces of circumstantial evidence.
Yes, but you can't, how many cars drive up and down that street in a day? You can't say, oh, we saw that car, he did it. And I have to give the police a lot of credit because they did do a lot of behind the scenes hush investigation.
They did.
So Brian had no idea that he was even on their radar. And he decided to take a cross-country trip with his father, and they drove from Idaho. Okay, it's not really cross-country. I'm being dramatic.
Close, but close. I mean, that's a trek.
It is a trek. But from Idaho all the way to Pennsylvania. And in that time frame, they were pulled over twice.
Within minutes. For the same thing. So this is what I found interesting going back to how the police really dug into this and really did what I consider like that dogged type detective work. Because they kind of went back to basics on this thing because there, like you said, there was not a lot of, that new DNA evidence and things like that. So they went back. And one of the things that really struck me, if you look at the psychology of killers, which we've talked about a lot because it's interesting how their minds work. So in the 3 weeks prior to the killings, he visited the particular area, the particular street with this house 19 times. They have him on video 19 times. And if you look at where this house is located, there is nothing around there. There's no 7-Eleven, no Taco Bell. Like there's no reason for him to be there. And then the day of the murders, so his car is there. He's pinged on cell phone signal. So his car is there. Around 9-10 o'clock, I believe it was, before the murders. Then it's there at the time of the murders, around the time of the murders. Then it comes back around 9 a.m. And if you look at the psychology of murders, they will scope out previously, and they always come back.
Well, if it is premeditated.
If it's
normally, if it is a crime of passion, which normally happens with lovers or cheaters or things of that is never what they consider premeditated.
No.
But did you know that he was a teaching assistant at the university?
Yes. And earning a doctorate in criminal justice?
Yes, which I think he should have. Wow. Anyway, we're just going to leave that thought bubble So he was a teaching assistant. So they're still trying to figure out where he came across these victims, where he came across these girls, because that's who it was more focused toward. And he did I believe he did reach out to one of the girls. I think it was on Instagram, and she ignored it, which, as girls, we all absolutely get random messages and we ignore it. It's just what you do. But, he ended up making that trip all the way to Pennsylvania, which is where his parents live. And when he was there, the SWAT team actually got together, do what they do. And they raided the house and they were able to arrest him in December. And I feel for such a gruesome crime with basically little to no evidence, that is a quick arrest.
7 weeks. So from November 13th, when the crime occurred, to December 30th, they arrested this guy. That's quick.
Yes.
They went through thousands and thousands of tips and calls. And they were dogged with this. They really put in an incredible amount of work in built this case.
Yeah, and the sad part is that the media, again, everyone knows I am not a fan of the media, the sad part about this is the whole time the media is saying that the police aren't doing anything and they're dragging their feet and, people should be fired and all this stuff. And I have to give it to the police. Like I said, they held it very secretive, very hush hush. And even though they were being scrutinized and they were under literally media's magnifying glass and people, we want answers, including the parents, which as a parent, I would have too. So I don't blame them.
Certainly.
But these police did, that department just did an incredible job of doing what they needed to do, putting their head down and getting their job done and finding the killer. Which he is, he does have a status hearing that is going to be coming up in late June. So I am planning on watching and trying to see how that turns out. I'm pretty sure he's going to be convicted of all 4 murders. But one of the things I did learn recently researching this case is he is actually being looked at for connections to other murders that are very similar to kind of what happens with these kids. Yeah. I hate to say kids, but
they're kids.
They're babies. They're kids. They're 19, 20. They're young.
They've not experienced life yet. They've not had that chance yet. So sure, they might be past the age of 18, but in the way that what we know now as true adults, what it means to be an adult, they're not there yet. They haven't had a life yet. They're just, the thing that really got me was the pictures of them the night of the murder. They're having a good time. They're doing what best friends do. They're being silly and grabbing food and, making
food truck.
Yeah. Just in their pictures of them together.
Oh, they were stunning, absolutely beautiful.
Just beautiful, beautiful people and just living their life. And that was, as a parent, that was crushing, to have someone take that from this world.
And it's just so senseless. Not that I would ever agree with murder or anything like that. But if you're protecting your home and you shoot an intruder, certainly understandable. If somebody hurt your child and you get revenge, I can even understand that. There are better ways to do it, but I understand that. But these 4 students, they still, aside from a few Instagram messages, aside from having him as a teacher's assistant at the university, they really don't know what his connection to these kids were. And that's the thing that sucks, is it's so senseless that these 4 beautiful lives were taken because of this psychopath. Right.
It makes me wonder, because it was kind of like the hub, of the party house. Yeah. These were very, popular kids. They just had that bright energy. It makes me wonder, if he kind of, through the, the college circuit, was going to these parties and kind of scoping things out. And it's a theory, but that leaves no trace, and with as many people coming and going, he's just going to blend into the crowd.
Yeah. Well, and, going back to that roommate, like I said, there are a lot of people that think she has something to do with it. There's a lot of people that think that she's just innocent.
Yeah.
I honestly believe, and, I like to do both sides. I like to say, what if she did have something to do with it? But what if she didn't?
Right.
And, I do think that with her being on the bottom level, he started at the top and was working his way down. I'm assuming, again, that brutally stabbing someone multiple times. And again, I'm not going to get into that number because it is still an open case and the families are still grieving.
Oh, yeah.
Doing that 4 times has got to be exhausting.
Oh, gosh.
I get winded bringing the laundry up the stairs.
Exactly.
So I can not, and one of them being a male, and he was an athletic male. So that had to be a struggle in itself. I think that if her room would have been on a different floor, that she could have also possibly been a victim. I think he was exhausted and tired by the time he saw her. And in his mind, he was probably like, I just gotta go.
Yeah, like, okay, I'm done.
Right. So I know people say she was in the wrong place at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think being on that bottom level might have saved her life.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, there were only a couple of them that had defensive wounds, one of which was the boyfriend, the one male.
Well, and his girlfriend.
Yeah.
They said that his girlfriend fought like no other.
Exactly.
Good for her. Good for her.
I
mean, it is unfortunate, but I am glad that she was able
she wore him out.
That she was able to defend herself the best she could. Because what I'm assuming is just if I were the perpetrator, I would take
go for the strongest.
I would take the guy out first because I would assume that the girl would just be traumatized with fear, and then she's going to be easier than the male. But, you know, from the reports and from what Brian slightly has admitted is that when he was attacking the male, she like full on like spider monkey, tried to fight him, tried to help. And I just think that is very noble of her. I mean, again, at 19, 20 years old, that's just not something you see a standard, you know, college girl do.
Right.
And her family, they said that she was feisty and she was very energetic and she loved with everything she had. And you know, I think that showed in her character right until the very last moment. So that is something for, you know, her, I mean, with all due respect, that is something that her family should definitely be proud of.
Absolutely.
But before we get further into it, we are going to take a really quick break. So we will be back in just a couple minutes. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Realm of Darkness. I'm Ashley and Candi, and we're just kind of going through the Idaho murders. So before we took break, Candi, I know that you were talking a little bit more about the roommate and things. So if you want to go ahead and.
So I feel really bad for this girl because I agree. Like, there's so many different ways you could look at this, from everything from she could have been, you know, frightened into doing, you know, participating in some way, staying quiet. She could have been, you know, the lucky girl that honestly he was just too tired, like you said, to really carry on, like, because she was, you know, in the basement.
Well, and we have to remember, I mean, even though he was caught very quickly, it still was a couple weeks. And she, I mean, I could not imagine the fear in her alone, wondering if he was going to come back for her since she was a witness. I mean, she's the only witness.
Right.
And she saw him. So for her, if I were her parents, I would have, you know, locked her up and kept her as safe as possible. And I love that they're not releasing names because, you know, like you said, it can go either way.
I mean, to think of what she has to go through, even, you know, even now that he, you know, and yes, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but
he'll be found guilty. I'm pretty sure. I
You
would
know,
have on that.
the fact that this poor girl opened a door and locked eyes with this person, that will probably never leave her.
No, she's always going to see that unless her brain kicks into survival and has a coping mechanism of trying to delete that thought.
And I hope for her that it does. I really hope for her that it does.
The news and media, you know, that once things hit the internet, you know, news and media, that never goes away. So it's going to be forefront in her face for some time, for quite some time. And the same with the rest of the students, you know, with it being a college campus, you know, those girls and I should say all four of them, they were all very popular. They were athletic. They were in all different types of groups and sororities and all these things. And it really took a toll on that whole community. Yeah. And it's devastating because now, you know, the kids are probably scared to go back to school. The parents don't want their kids to go back to school. So now your entire college career, it's supposed to be a time of learning and growing, and you're supposed to experience all the crazy things that college has to offer, and they're just going to miss out on it. Right. They really are. And it sucks for them because they are also, if we think about it, they were in high school during COVID. Exactly. So it's sheltered. Yes. They didn't get to have a normal high school experience, and now they're going into this in college. Right. And it's just a very unfortunate situation. And I don't know, I think 4 lives were just taken senselessly. And this guy, I hope, you know, I don't know if, you know, we're going to have to bleep this, but I hope he rots in hell. And I hope that he's a big guy named Bubba and that they become very close and sentimental. Absolutely. I hope he's holding his pocket, you know, walking down the cell block, and, you know, they make good friends, very good friends. Right. So I will be interested to see how June goes. Yeah. Still following this case, though, there are a few things, and I know we talked about it, and I said I wasn't going to hit it to you until the show, but I've noticed, and this happens with a lot of cases and a lot of tragedy, is that, you know, people start to come out of the woodwork. And with us both being in the paranormal field and knowing some incredible people, but also some shady people, you know, one of the things I came across are these psychics. Oh, yeah. That are coming out of the woodwork and offering these psychic readings and these, we'll connect you with this, with, you know, these students. And they're doing this, but they're publicizing it, you know, and that's another part that I hate when it comes to media. And it's almost like people, I'm not saying that these psychics are, it's just my personal feeling is that if you're truly trying to help a family that is grieving, or you're truly trying to help somebody that's going through these tragedies, why do you need it publicized? Exactly. Why do you need it to be shown on the news? Why do you have to videotape yourself on TikTok? You know, why can't you just reach out to the family, have an intimate moment, let them have that closure, or let them have that moment of grief, or whatever it is? What is in it for you? Right. See, I put that in the same category, yes, as these people that go around and they film themselves like giving money or food or, you know, whatever to the homeless. Like, if you are legitimately doing something to help someone else, you're not doing it for clout. If you're publicizing it, you're doing it for clout, and you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and it will come back to bite you. Yes. And this is exactly why, and, you know, it was in the comments earlier, this is why locations that have these types of tragedies, they get torn down or they get demolished because, you know, that town or that area, the whatever, they don't want that media presence, and they don't want that continuous cycle of enthusiasts. And let's be honest, you know, I love true crime to the fullest. But there are those people who take it to another level, and there are people who want to reenact things, and there are people who look up to the perpetrators and the murders versus having these awful, you know, these sad feelings for the victims. And you know, Jim's right in the comments. They are looking at tearing that house down because of the tragedy that happened. And I don't know. I think it's sad. I was watching these psychics, and I know some incredible mediums and some incredible psychics, and I just don't think if I was able to do a reading for a family that I would want it publicized. I would want it more personal, more closure for them.
Right. I feel like something like that should always be done behind closed doors. I feel like in those instances, it should be just like prayer is. It needs to be behind closed doors. That is for the family. That's not for the public. Right. That's just my personal feelings. Other people look at it differently. But I agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of times where there's been a big tragedy like this, people are so gung-ho sometimes of what might be there, and they're focused so much on the perpetrator, they lose the victim. The focus shifts. Yeah. And then it's almost inadvertently so, but then the victims are re-victimized, and so are the families. Because they're harassed, and things are constantly re-brought back up. And then you were talking about issues with the media before. One thing that I noticed in some publications was the media was very focused on, oh well, all of these girls partied and they did this, almost like they were trying to make it out like they're right, that well, they should have locked their doors. They should have done this. They shouldn't have lived in a party house. Now, they did not come out and say that. However, we all know how the media works.
But let's be honest. You're in college.
Right.
That's what you do is you drink, you forget you have an exam, you study, and then you really harden and then you try to pass it. I mean, not everybody, but, the majority of people, it's their first time truly on their own, away from their parents. So they're exploring so many different avenues.
Right.
And
it's your experience to live away from the shelter of your parents. And you never learn if you don't fall down and bust your butt once in a while and figure out how to pick yourself back up.
Well, and why does the media almost blame? It's almost like victim shaming. And I will say with this one, they did a tiny bit, but they did do a great job of getting their faces out there and continuously showing, friends saying how incredible these kids were, and they were loving, and they were this and they were that. So with this case, they didn't do that so much, and they really did put the students at the front of a lot of the media. So with this case, if that picture of the four of them pop up, we know instantly who that is. We're like, oh, those are the kids from Idaho. But there's other cases where the victims get forgotten. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer. How many people can name some of those victims?
Exactly.
Many. Charles Manson, yes, because she was an actress. But
if she wasn't an actress, how many people would know?
Exactly.
And how many people know other than, and I'm not even going to say her name.
Well, she wasn't the only one that was killed.
Exactly. How many people know the other ones that were,
Right. Well, and same thing with the snipers that were on the East Coast. You don't know the people that they killed. The Craigslist killer. What are those victim names? And I think it's sad that in these tragedies and in these killings, I think that's where we screw up, is we do very much publicize and almost idolize the killer and the perpetrator and the school shooters. Let's get into that. We're kind of jumping ship, but and at some point we need to take a step back and pull them out of it. And with this, they had done a great job. Brian was arrested and he is in prison waiting trial. We all know his name, but look at the Murdaugh.
Yeah.
Look at the Murdaugh murders. How many deaths are tied to that family that no one had any idea about until the son and the mother got murdered? And then the Murdaugh name. I don't know the girl that was killed in the boating accident. I don't know the guy that was apparently a hit and run.
Like everybody starts digging, and then they start putting the pieces together, and
Yeah, it's a really awful thing.
Yeah.
But with that being said, one of the things with Brian, now that I said let's publicize, with him being the murderer, they are doing different psychological testing.
Yes.
And I know that he is under a lot of evaluations because, again, typical thing is I was not in my right mind.
Right.
But when you have somebody who has a major in criminology, I think you need to step back and think, like, is he playing you?
Right. Well, and here's what's interesting. So after the murders and whatnot, when they were watching him, right? And they noticed that he never went anywhere without latex gloves on. Never. He would wipe everything on his car, inside, outside, everything, continuously, every square inch of his vehicle. Dispose of, everything. And of course he wore gloves to do this. He's a criminology major, he's making sure not to leave DNA fingerprints to the best of his ability. After the murders, he's like, hey Dad, let's do, fly out here. And then
the perfect alibi.
Yeah. I mean,
you're in Pennsylvania across the country with your parents, but he took the evidence with him.
He did.
That's the problem is I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but they found the knife in his parents' house.
They did.
I mean, okay, I'm not condoning this, but in your truck across the country, you never thought about like rolling the window down and
right, like
chucking it out the window?
I mean, if you want to hide something, but he's cocky, he's confident, he feels like he's smarter, than everybody else, and he fits the profile.
He does, yes.
Of a sociopath. He kind of has that. He's a little Ted Bundy-esque, a little bit.
But in all of your genius ideas, not once in thousands of miles did you just think like a quick little flick of the wrist. You can't get caught with the murder weapon and deny it.
Like, and then the body cam footage blew me away when he's talking to the officer, and his dad's sitting right there, and he's following. Yeah, and he's just like, "Oh, yeah, okay," so nonchalant, very normal, very. It's like, dude, there's no way that you're going to get away with. I was not in my right mind. No, because everything that you've done subsequent after.
Kept the weapon. Yeah. And never thought about tossing it. And then, I don't know. I sit there and I watch some of these cases, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but I sit there and I think like, some of these cases I watch, these murderers, they're the dumbest smart people I know.
They really are. They really are.
Their IQ level is normally off the charts. And it's odd, like Jeffrey Dahmer, again, I say one of my favorites, but it's just because it's such an interesting case and interesting mindset. But he was classified as a genius because his IQ was so high. Charles Manson is another one. He had a mediocre to high IQ. I don't know about Brian. I didn't do the research on him.
I don't think I haven't found anything yet for him, but I'm sure that will come out later when they.
But I'm like, you guys have these incredible genius IQs, and you have the bodies in a tub in your living room, or you don't chuck the knife out the window.
So what I've noticed though, so even though they have that really high level of intelligence, so what they lack typically is they lack the actual emotional intelligence, and they lack common sense.
But even emotional intelligence, like, I still feel like if I committed a crime, my first thing is like, I shouldn't have done that. I don't want to get caught.
But they don't care. That's the thing, though. They don't care, and they're so narcissistic that they're like, no, I'm not going to get caught, and if I do, like, I'm gonna get away with it. They can't.
Look at somebody like the Golden State Killer or the Zodiac Killer. They made it into a puzzle, and for years, decades, they didn't get caught.
Yeah, Zodiac's never been.
Yeah, the Golden State Killer was, but
well, yeah, but finally,
and Jack the Ripper, even back in that early time, Jack the Ripper was never caught. And I just sit there and think like something as small as a murder. We sound like we're just really giving everybody the way to get away with it, but like the very first thing that they look for on watch 48 Hours, watch any of that, they look for a murder weapon.
They do.
I mean, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm just like, Lord, have mercy. Can you?
Right. And, you know.
And then why? That's the other thing is I want to know why.
Yeah.
We will probably never find that out, but I want to know what about these students. Was it one particular person that he was after and the other 3 just were in the way? Or was it he was after one and the rest were collateral damage?
Right.
Was he intentionally going after all 4 of them? I want to know what the motivation, what the motive is behind it. And I don't know, because you're right, he is so cocky and he's so like, I don't know if he will ever give the family that closure of why those ones were chosen.
Right. And see, those are the ones that make me so angry, because I'm like, they deserve an answer.
Yes.
They really do. Like, why did you, what was it about these kids? Because they didn't deserve it.
No. And this is where my heartlessness is going to come in. And I will admit, I'm a cold person to people who are like this. But this is where I think, you know what? Some of these killers, they are some of the biggest whips. Sorry, trying to find a good term to say on air.
Yes.
Some of the biggest whips. You know what? Put them in front of the court and beat them until they tell you.
Yes.
If they have the kahunas to brutally stab 4 people, you know what? Give one of the dads a Louisville Slugger and let him go to town until he tells you why he did it.
So something really interesting that I found today was Idaho is actually looking to bring back the firing squad.
Well, and the comment right there, probably because he is guilty of other murders.
Yep.
I 100% think that the more that they investigate, because he did it, he pretended, or I shouldn't say pretended, he acted like he had done this 100 times and it was no big deal, and he didn't think he was going to get caught. So I 100% agree with that comment. I think that
I agree.
The more they dig into it, I think they're going to find other victims, not in the same area. Do you think that they're going to find, and maybe not as brutal? I think it's going to be similar to what happened.
It's going to be a buildup.
Yes, but it's not going to be to that extreme. It might be 1 victim, 2 victims.
But the way this was done, I agree.
His confidence level, I do not think it's the first time, because, I mean, clearly I've never killed anybody, but I feel like even if it was an accident, I would be a nervous wreck. Like, say, I was driving and I got in a car accident, someone passed away. I would be a nervous wreck that an accident would cause me to spend the rest of my life in prison. And he was just so confident, like, oh yeah, no, I'm good, nothing. It just, he's gotten away with something in the past, and I just don't know what it is.
And this is probably going to sound really strange, but so the crime scene was almost too clean. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell that this is not a first timer doing this.
Oh, because of the gloves and the mask
so
he had different shoes or something of that.
Right. Yeah. So it was, and even if you take, like premeditation, throw that out the window, right? But it was almost as if someone went in there knowing, okay, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to ensure that I don't leave too much behind to make a very easy trail back to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick the area, the victims, everything to where there's not a direct link.
Right. But you would think, again, you would look for street cameras. You wouldn't have left your knife sheath.
Right. I mean, so there was a lot of things, but it was odd.
But in the heat of the moment, people do you go into interviews or whatever, and you're like, this is how it's going to go. And then you're like, oh, crap. So, I mean, that could have happened. I'm sure he didn't expect them to fight back as much as they did. And maybe that's why he got a little jarred.
It makes me wonder, like, so like the inside of the crime scene itself is like there's things about it that's like, it triggers in my brain like, that's too clean. This is not a first timer doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But then other things about it makes me think there's something about either one person or all of the people that he couldn't leave it alone. He had to get one or all of these people. You know, that was his mark. He was obsessed with something. He couldn't leave it alone, regardless if there was cameras.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's where the question comes in is, what is this now a case of stalking?
Right. That went too far or something.
Yeah, and I know that there were allegations that he might have been stalking one of the girls. I'm not 100%, which I want to say Kaylee, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me. But there were allegations because I think he had a picture of her in his phone. And again, this, and I know we're running out of time, but this also brings up, a whole nother issue where, we're both women. This brings up another issue where, and don't shoot me, guys, that some men, almost feel entitled, I guess would be the right word, where if they proposition a female or they make a comment and the female shuts them down, or the female is like, nah, I'm good, all of a sudden, well, she's a whore, she's a slut, she doesn't like me, oh, she can't have me, or it turns worse, and then it's like, well, if I can't have you, nobody can have you, and it turns into this level of obsession. Perfect example, you on Netflix, it turns into this obsession, and then unfortunately people end up losing their lives over it. And again, there's no confirmation that it was anything of that nature, but is possible because, like I said, Brian had a picture of one of the girls in his phone. He had tried to message her on Instagram and she didn't reply. And instead of taking the hint, some people take that as a slap in the face. Some people take it as a shot to their ego. And then sometimes people just can't take rejection very well. And all they do is they counteract with anger.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So,
but it is getting close to the end of time for us. So I want to thank everybody for coming back and being so supportive of us. We were on a hiatus for, I think, about 6 months, but we are going to be back every Thursday at 8 Eastern. I almost said 8 Central, 8 Eastern time. So you can catch us every single Thursday right here. Next week, we are debating on possibly talking about the Murdaugh murders just because there's so much to it. But if you guys ever have a suggestion or have a case that you want us to talk about or just kind of want us to go back and forth, I'm great at playing devil's advocate. Go ahead and hit us up on Facebook. You can find me under Ashley Moreno. She is under Candi Howard. Or you can message the station or Realm of Darkness. Yeah. But until next week, guys, thanks for joining.
Thanks. Bye.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.